1970s, clergywomen of the United Methodist Church were clear that it was time to support a woman for the episcopacy. At the first United Methodist Clergywomen's Consultation, held at Scarrett Center in Nashville in 1975, many resolutions were put forth, including the hope of electing at least one woman bishop in 3 different jurisdictions in 1976. Unfortunately, no woman bishop was elected in 1976. But at the second consultation in Dallas in 1979, Marjorie Matthews was raised up to be supported for the episcopacy. Marjorie Swank Matthews was the district superintendent in Michigan. She was a former pastor, and she held a doctorate in Old Testament. She was elected on July 17, 1980, at the North Central Jurisdictional Conference as the first woman bishop in the United Methodist Church. She was assigned to the Wisconsin area, where she served for 4 years until her retirement in 1984. In this early video of Bishop Matthews, she shares some of her thoughts on being the first woman elected bishop in the United Methodist Church.
As far as I know, I am the only woman bishop in the world, and the first, of course, in the United Methodist Church. There may have been women bishops back in the 12th, 13th, 14th centuries, women who had served as bishops, but were never recognized as such by the church. There are several people, I think, who have never reconciled to the fact that there is a woman bishop or that that is a possibility. I hear from those people occasionally, especially when I say something that they don't like or am quoted in the paper as saying something they don't like. I believe they are entitled to their opinion. However, I firmly believe that God calls both men and women and calls even children into the work of the church. God is more interested in persons who are willing to be used in the ministry or in the work of the church than I think that he is in the sex of the person. Sometimes being a symbol of the highest office in the United Methodist Church and being the first woman makes me feel like the national monument, as I think things ought to feel when people come and visit and look and don't know what to say next.
Following a long battle with breast cancer, Bishop Marjorie Matthews died on June 30th, 1986. In 1984, 2 more women were elected to the episcopacy. Leontine T.C. Kelly, who was the second woman bishop and the first woman of color to be elected to the episcopacy, was selected in the Western jurisdiction. Also that year, Judith Craig was elected in the North Central jurisdiction. In 1988, the Northeastern jurisdiction was the next to elect a woman as a bishop when they selected Susan Morrison. Following are the stories of these 3 remarkable women pioneers in the United Methodist Church.
The call to the episcopacy was not a call particularly. It came through Deidre Crewall, who was chair of the Commission on Status and Role of Women of the Virginia Conference. And when they were electing delegates to General Conference, she came to me and said, Leontine, no woman other than a United Methodist woman, a lay woman, has ever been elected to General Conference. No clergy woman in the history of this conference. And the Commission on Status and Role of Women feel you need to run for General Conference. And that's the way it got started. And somehow in that whole process, Glorieta, New Mexico happened. Yep. Kathy Nickerson, who was with the Board of Higher Education and Ministry, had put together a conference for us, and Sharon Brown Christopher, now Bishop Sharon Brown Christopher, and I were co-chair. But I remember it was there that, and on that committee, as we began to work with it, with that conference, that we said, you know, we really need to help the church understand that we have to make the same preparation. Our calls are individual, but we have same purposes. And we begin to say, a woman as a bishop, a woman as a bishop. What would that be like? I still didn't think I was going to be it.
But it was that kind of groundswell, and it was an important thing around you that we began to see the possibility that it didn't have to be somebody just in a jurisdiction, that we could elect any woman in the church if we wanted to.
In 1984, Leontine T.C. Kelly was approached by the women of the Southeast jurisdiction to run for the episcopacy. Agreeing to run, Kelly did not believe that she could be elected a bishop. However, on her deathbed, Kelly's 102-year-old mother foretold her daughter's rise to the episcopacy.
My mother spoke. She hadn't spoken since Sunday, since she was stricken, and she said, "You're going to be a bishop." And I said, poor mamas, they can't even die in peace. They got their kids on their mind. And I went over to her bed, and I took her hand, and I said, "Mama, there's no way for me to be elected a bishop in the United Methodist Church. But as a woman, it's important that I run. As a black woman, it's important that I run. And you always taught us to open doors that were closed and walk through doors that were open." My mother, I don't know where she got the energy from. She couldn't move, but her voice rose. In her mama tone, she said, "You are going to be a bishop." But the women in the Southeast gathered together, and I was their candidate. It was very clear when Deidre had asked me to be a candidate to General Conference that year, and I had spoken about that in the other section. But she agreed to be what we wouldn't call a campaign. We called it a journey to the episcopacy for all of us. And the women in the Southeast were very supportive of that. So the women were going ahead, and it was like they were moving against the structure rather than with the structure. And we began to meet every night. And our meetings turned into prayer meetings at the jurisdictional conference. And one of the stories we got, that one of the young theologians, one of the young seminary students went back to the powers that be and said, "You don't have to worry about Teeny Kelly being elected a bishop. All the women are doing having prayer meeting every night." When I got a call from the women, a group of women from California, Nevada, and I was supposed to have preached for them. And they were saying, "Please let us nominate you out here, because we feel we can get you elected a bishop out here, and we feel you need to be a bishop." And I said, well, the women here are supporting me, so, and it's hard because the women were not being treated well because they were supporting a woman for bishop.
Right.
I ran into some difficulty with the process of electing a bishop in the Southeast, and I withdrew from the process. And that was a year that United Methodist Communications had the whole network so that it comes through television at each jurisdiction. In 15 minutes, you knew everything that was happening. And it went all over, and it got out here. And that evening when we were meeting, we got a call from the women from California. "If you can be in Boise, Idaho on Thursday morning at 9 o'clock, we're certain you can be elected bishop." And even the woman who became my secretary was saying, "I've been secretary to 3 male bishops. I'd love to be your secretary." And Deidre and I were roommates, and I said, "Well, we'll pray about it." And during the night we did. And one of the things that they had told me, the women said from California, "In each caucus meeting at this jurisdictional conference, a woman represents you and tells your story." And I said to Deidre, if somebody who doesn't even know me other than what they've read is going to do this, then I think we need to go. Well, Deidre had said in the meeting, "If you go, I'm going with you. We all know you, and we think you ought to be a bishop, but there's no way for us to do it." And we were decided there were some tactics we wouldn't stoop to do as women in terms of the process itself. Right. And the integrity of it. The movement was all across country, because one of the bishops just told me in Minneapolis that when we were there just few council meetings ago, he said, Tina, do you know that you're the only bishop in the church whose name was entered into every jurisdiction? And that's the kind of groundswell that was going on, and people were praying everywhere.
As nationwide momentum began to build to elect her a bishop, Leontine Kelly and her friend Judith Craig flew to the Western Jurisdiction Conference in Boise, Idaho.
In every caucus group, they called for those of us who were candidates and who were there. And the process was so open, they would, in the midst of it, say, call for a caucus, for caucuses. And that was not the same kind of situation that I had come out of. And then they asked me, they said, can you justify, we've elected a Japanese this morning, Roy Sana. We're going to elect a Hispanic. And if we elect you, that'll be 3 racial ethnics and no Caucasian. Can you justify a ballot like that? I said, that's all I've been voting on. I've been voting on ballots with nothing but Caucasians ever since I've been able to vote in this church. When the election took place, they had just elected the Hispanic, and they were singing Jesus Love Me in Spanish. And then when I was elected, they sang We Shall Overcome. And I looked up in the balcony, and it was filled with teenagers. The youth were all in the balcony, and they were of all kinds of youth, Native American, African American, Caucasian American. They were all different colors, Asian American, all up there, and they just burst out singing, We Are a Rainbow Ready to Shine. And it was just so powerful for me. I could just hear my mother saying, you are going to be a bishop. And I said, Mama, you didn't say where, did you?
In 1984, the same year that Bishop Kelly was elected, Reverend Judith Craig was struggling with her own call to the episcopacy.
I'd been elected to General Conference. Our delegation was working on candidates, and they came to me and asked me to be the candidate. And I said no, I would not. I did not feel called to the episcopacy. I got to General Conference, and 2 things happened. One was the bishops processed down the aisle, as they do. And there in the middle of them was this diminutive woman whom I knew, and whom I knew was going to retire. And I looked at that council with that little woman in it and said inside myself, never again should that council be without an active woman in its midst. And something kind of stirred at me. Then, throughout General Conference, people began to say to me, we're going to vote for you whether you're a candidate or not. We're going to elect you. We're going to vote for you. That was very troubling to me. But I looked in the mirror and thought to myself, well, if not me, what sister am I going to sacrifice here, you know? Who else shall we ask to make the sacrifice? I said to a friend who is kind of a spiritual counselor to me, I don't know how to deal with this. And he said, well, I want to ask you 3 questions. Don't answer them, just pray on them. What do all the events of your life up until now seem to point toward? What are you prepared for? What do all the significant voices in your life whom you trust say you ought to be thinking? And when you imagine the future, what makes joy bubble up? Well, the first 2, it was so painfully obvious I couldn't stand it. But the third one, I could not imagine joy in the episcopacy. Just. It seemed heavy, empty, dark when I imagined it. Nevertheless, I went home, deeply troubled, said to my delegation, you have every right to throw me out on my ear and tell me to just get out of here, but if you still want me as your Episcopal candidate, I'll submit to that, and we'll see what God has in mind. I finally left for jurisdictional conference, I think really having sunk into, all right, if this is of God, I can't stop it. And if it isn't of God, they can't do it. The process in the North Central jurisdiction is a very open interviewing process with caucuses and break times and 30-minute interview periods, 3 back-to-back, and it's just grueling. Well, the voting started, and I was in the top 6, and in our jurisdiction, the people in the top 6 on the first ballot always some of those will be, I mean, you're seeing there the list from among which the bishop will come. Historically, that had been that way. But we were only electing 4, and there were 6, so I'm, okay, that's all right, you know. David Lawson was elected. Woody White was elected. Reuben Job was elected. By Thursday morning, some folks had been out and around in the hall, and it was clear that there were some women that still were restive around me. So some of my folks said, gather the women's caucus. Gather the women here at noon, and let's put Judy in the middle of them. Let's have it out. Let's duke it out. So we did. We met. That may have been Wednesday noon. I don't remember. Jean Audrey would remember, probably. Anyway, one of those noon times. I mean, it all runs into this month-long 3 days. We had a stand-up, have-it-out session, you know, and they asked me the questions about how did I see feminism and how would I behave in this and would I be an advocate for that and da-da-da-da-da-da. And apparently, I passed muster because they began then to offer support. And they suggested that my folks weren't being aggressive, that the East Ohio Conference wasn't being aggressive enough. So they came up with this funny little thing of getting yellow ribbons. And all Thursday morning, my friends sat in the balcony. There was a balcony in front of, behind the dais. So I was, again, we were on the front row. It's interesting, we drew the front row again. And so the folks that were supporting me outside the delegation are sitting right up there where I could see them. They're up there cutting these little yellow ribbons and writing on them my voting number, 201. And they're going around pinning them on people, you know, 201, 201, this blooming of these yellow ribbons. And they give me one that says, I am 201. So, just before we broke our supper, they announced Tina Kelly's election in the West. And I said, folks, face it, there it goes. The church has elected its woman for this quadrennium. That's okay. Ballot was collected, we sang. And as the runner came in the door with the results, we were singing Precious Lord, Take My Hand, which is my dad's signature song. Now, he was deceased by this time. And it was like he had walked in the room. And sure enough, ballot was read and I was elected. But then I'm taken into the Episcopal Committee, where I'm now on the other side of the table. This was interesting, you know. And I get interviewed. It's now about 1:30 a.m. And they put all the bishops in a room and tell us to wait while they make the assignments. So about 4:15, the Episcopal Committee knocked on the door, and delegates from different conferences came and began to beckon to us. And Michigan beckoned to me, and that just pleased me no end. I don't know why, but I decided if I have to do this, Michigan would be great. I learned somewhere in the midst of that I needed a lay and a clergy to present me. I also learned that they insisted on a black robe, and my clergy sisters had given me a white robe to come with. Yeah. So they borrowed a black robe for me to be consecrated in. It's not happening anymore. You can be consecrated in any color you want in the North Central jurisdiction now. You better believe you know who led that fight. Bill and Judy McCartney are kind of like family to me. He was on the Episcopal Committee, and I said to him, will you and Judy present me? He said, well, let's go ask Judy. She was a delegate, and she was sitting up in bed with her eyes wide open like, what's happening, you know. I asked her, and she cried and said yes. Well, it was so late that I said, if I go to bed now, I'll be a wreck. So Judy and I sat in a lounge where you could see out over Lake Superior and watch the sunrise until it was time to take a shower and go to breakfast at 6 and get on that bus at 7 and go be consecrated at 9. And then have lunch with the college afterwards, and about 2 o'clock, neither having been in bed, we're free to go. The consecration service was incredibly beautiful. And as tired as I was, and as worn as I was, I have absolutely etched memories of every bit of that. Bill and Judy were asleep on the ground under a tree waiting for me because they were going to drive me back home. We had planned that. And they got up from their nap and said, okay, we're going to drive you home across Michigan, because that was a possibility from Duluth, Minnesota. Judy's favorite memory of this is that we got to Marquette about 9:45, and Bill had arranged for a hotel there. But we hadn't eaten, so we went to the only place we could find open, which was an Arby's. And Judy and I went to a booth and sat down. Bill went up to the counter, and Judy said that I put my head on the table and started to sob and said, "Oh my gosh, I'm a bishop." She said she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I was so pathetic. But I mean, it had been an incredibly long and anguishing time.
In 1988, 4 years after the elections of Bishops Kelly and Craig, Reverend Susan Morrison found the Holy Spirit at work as it drew her into the episcopacy.
1988 General Conference, I was elected, actually as the first clergywoman, to the Judicial Council of the church. Well, that meant you were not a part of anything else. You were not a delegate, you were not in boards and agencies. It's that separation. So, that summer, before jurisdictional conference, I wasn't going to go to the Northeast Jurisdictional Conference at all. And I got a call about 3 days before that jurisdictional conference started from Andrew Lady, who was the secretary of the jurisdiction at the time. And he said, "Susan, we would really like you to come and be at jurisdictional conference. You're the only representative on the whole Northeast to the Judicial Council. It would be good for them to see you, and it would be good for you to be represented, the Judicial Council to be represented there." And so I said, "Okay, I'll come for a few days." There was one woman who had decided and felt she was called to run for the episcopacy that quadrennium, and her name was Judith Craig. She was a professor at Wesley Seminary. And on the side, because I was not supposed to be part of politics, I did some advising with some other people for her in her campaign. So she was running. And she did reasonably well, but then her votes began to go down. It was pretty clear that she was not going to go any further than that. I believe it was the 6th ballot. It was the end of the day, the first day, and they were reading all the numbers. And they got down to the end and they said, "Susan Morrison, 1 vote." Well, I'm all embarrassed. I'm thinking they all thought I vote for myself. And I'm up on stage wanting to say, "Judicial Council doesn't vote." Not me. Which one of my friends voted for me?
Right,
You know,
right.
kind of tee-hee-hee. And off I went to party that evening. Okay. Before we left that evening, they took a second ballot. And then they were going to announce it in the morning. We got in the assembly room. They read the votes. They got down, and Susan Morrison had 2 votes. This, folks, was a grassroots movement, I could tell. Doubled my vote. I was having a grand time with this. Tee-hee, no big deal, but isn't this fun?
Right.
Next ballot, 16 votes. And I remember starting to get up to withdraw. For one thing, Deidre Kewell's name was still in there. And I wasn't out to compete with her. And it shouldn't be that women compete with one another, but at that point, we were lifting up a woman, and we wanted her to be acknowledged, to say she's the one we feel at this time should be taken seriously. And I remember one of the bishops grabbing my arm and holding it and saying, "Just let the Spirit work, whatever way it's going to work, Susan. Just stay where you are." Now, I don't really think I don't know. I never asked him. He thought I might be elected, but he believed, as many of us believe, that God works in the process, and it's not for you to get up and say don't. So I sat there. Next ballot, and I got, I think, double that. I mean, I don't remember now particularly the numbers. And now I was beginning to get nervous. And I remember there was a break, and I got off the stage immediately, and I went to find Deidre Craig. And I said, and at this point there had been several women who'd come to Deidre, and I don't think it was just women, and said, "Deidre, you're going down now. You've probably peaked." And we went off all by ourselves. I remember we took a walk, and I said, "Deidre, I certainly had no plans to be a bishop or to run for bishop, that you were the one that many of us are supporting." And she said to me, "I'm going to withdraw." And I said, "Shall I leave my name in?" So not that I'm elected, but that the body realizes there are other women capable, that there are other names out there that someday might be elected bishop, whether it was me or anyone else.
Right.
And we sort of agreed to it. At that point, there was another I think before there was another ballot, someone got up and said, could we have any information on Susan Morrison? Because all the others had, at this point they had brochures and buttons. It was really quite quite a lot of campaigning that went on for election of bishops. And I said, no, I have nothing. I was kind of numb, and I just said no, still not really thinking that I was going to get it anyways, and I didn't want to put together anything. Well, it was lunchtime. And at lunchtime, I'll never forget, I was surrounded by about 6 to 8 women from different conferences, including the 2 people that were running Deidre's campaign, including Lynn Joslin, who 4 years earlier had run on her own, and then of course we put our names up as co-bishop in the clergywomen's gathering, and several other folk. People who all had set aside their dreams, or their hopes, so to speak, to help me put together some kind of, I call it pedigree or resume, that could be handed out to the delegates. Because at that point, again, I was still numb and wasn't thinking too well. And over lunch, they sat down, worked that out, typed it up, and made sure it got passed out to all the delegates. It was what I call one of those grand moments of solidarity for women. By the time that evening was over, I was a bishop. And somehow, because I think I was able to say no for the right reasons. No, I don't want to be the first. No, it's probably not where and somehow in that, then I was able to think freely or more openly about, is this where God calls me? And then say yes. In reality, it was time for a woman bishop. And I think the body was feeling, let's elect one, if we find one we feel comfortable voting for. It was electrifying for the jurisdictional conference. And if I can forget it was me and look at it in a little bit back in terms of a perspective, it's because it was called the work of the Holy Spirit. All the campaigning, all the brochures, all the buttons, all the gatherings before a jurisdictional conference, it hadn't mattered that time. That someone emerged and people were just exhilarated. And Andrew Lady said this to me later. He said, every other time we've had this election, after maybe the first or second ballot, someone gets up and says, let's only read the names of those who have, say, 5 votes or 10 votes, instead of all those with just one or just 2. He said this is the first time in his experience, and he had been the secretary of the jurisdictional conference for quite a few times. He said, this is the first time in my memory that no one got up and cut off the reading of the votes. And because of that, then, my name was read with 1 ballot.
Bishop Morrison's reflections on her consecration demonstrate the importance of the unity of women in the transformation of her life.
I asked Deidre to accompany me down as a symbol of solidarity of women. The other thing I remember is that when the last person laid their hands on me and I got up and was to go and stand with the others, I felt differently. It was like, and it wasn't like a burden was off me. I can't explain it, except I felt like something had been transformed, and I was different.
Maybe you could share with us what you feel you have gained personally, and maybe what it has cost you personally.
Oh my, it's given me my life. I cannot imagine the places I've been, the people I have been blessed to know, the experiences I've had that I never would have dreamed in my life would be given me. The Episcopacy has given me a picture of the Church of Jesus Christ as this knitting of people around the world, an understanding of the body of Christ. It's just been an incredibly mind and soul expanding experience, so that it's hard for me to remember what I thought before 1984, because it's become so much a part of the fabric of my being, to look at the church in particular, and the Episcopacy has given me that kind of hope. It's made me a very hope-filled person. Not that there isn't an underbelly, but it's primarily hope. What does it cost me? Nothing compared to what it's given me. I don't know if my health would have deteriorated as it did outside the episcopacy. Maybe not. But in terms of the gain and the gifts in my life, I don't think the costs mount up.
I would agree. I have no regrets. I do think, and I don't think it began with the episcopacy. I think for women who are now in the Council of Bishops, basically we were pioneers.
That's right.
We were the first. I think that journey has cost a lot of us some health issues. Half of us are cancer survivors. That's a pretty big percentage. Now that doesn't mean we might not have gotten cancer sometime along the way anyways, but I do think that there are some of those kind of factors. But it's not just the episcopacy, it's the journey we've taken as being the first or breaking a mold, and all that entails. But no regrets. It's been a gift beyond measure.
By the year 2000, 13 women had been elected as bishops in the United Methodist Church. The women who broke the barriers of the episcopacy to become the first women bishops continue to support their sisters in the faith while encouraging more women into leadership roles within the church.